Hi, this is Brendan from Bedrock Games and the Bedrock blog, and I'm sorry I'm not looking directly at the camera. I'm doing this as a test. I'm just getting used to trying to upload YouTube videos again. I don't know how many of these I'm going to do. As you can see, I just moved into a new place. I'm very unkempt. My wife won't let me shave my beard, so this is how it's going to look for a while. But I'd like to look like less of a mountain man as these videos go on. But honestly, it's kind of comfortable. I just popped on so that I could give some announcements and some updates and also just test the channel. I think I might also want to move my camera around. I'm not really happy with this angle, but for right now, this will do. And again, as you can see, I'm just moving in, so we don't have like everything all set up, so it looks kind of weird in the background, and there's no curtains or anything. But yeah, so I've just been in the middle of a move, and so that's caused a number of delays in my blogging and in various other things. I've still been keeping up with it, but there was a little bit of a lag between entries and a lag in some updates. So I just want to let people know that the Sons of Lady 87 book, that's available in print. You should definitely go check it out. I also wanted to talk about how useful it is for us when people do reviews and how appreciative we are. And when people post about it online as well, that stuff is all really useful. Bedrock is a really small company. Like most small RPG companies, the revenue stream is very tight. They're not very big profit margins, and so it's also very hard as the internet changes for someone like me and people that are affiliated with me to to reach a broad audience online. It's getting harder and harder. Even if you're doing the same things, you just don't have the same reach that you had before. And it's also harder even when you pay for ads and things like that to get people's attention. So there's just less bang for your buck in general. So I hate to sound like a broken record on this particular issue, but I just wanted to let people know, if you like the books, definitely tell people about them. Definitely feel free to write a review, to share things. Word of mouth really helps us. And again, the Sons of Lady 87 book, it's available in print. You can find it online on various sales platforms. You find it on PDF at Drive Through RPG. I do want people to understand, if you're new to Bedrock Games, that all of our stuff is up as PDFs on Drive Through RPG. The remainder of the print material is up at Studio 2 Publishing. That's one place you can get it, but it's also in distribution through them in a variety of places. So you can go online and look for it. You'll find them on Amazon, on various online RPG print sellers. And if you have any trouble, you can always email us or email me, and I can try to hook you up with something. But yeah, people sometimes get confused about that, and they don't think that our books are in print. There are some books that are only in PDF, but they're a rarity. Most of our books are in both print and PDF, except for things like Tournament of Dalu and things where it was just done strictly as a PDF, and maybe one day we'll do it in print as well. So again, I apologize for my mountain man appearance. I'm really quite unkempt these days, as we've been moving, and I'm hoping to start looking more like my old self as this goes on. I'm also probably a lot older since I've last done one of these. It's been, oh God, I don't think I've done YouTube videos for about at least 6 years, maybe longer, maybe a little bit shorter, I don't know. But I've definitely aged in that period of time, because I've seen the old YouTube videos. Like my nose has changed, a lot of things have changed. We'll see how this goes. And for the rest of this video, I'm just going to kind of ramble about Bedrock game stuff that we've been doing. If you want, you can check us out in the blog. I have an ongoing campaign log for the Celestial Plume Masters campaign. That's a campaign that's set in the Sons of Lady 87 book material. It's sort of Southern Empire region, and the party is playing, for lack of a better word, it's like a Godfather type campaign. They're basically selling celestial plume and encroaching into the territory of a powerful criminal empire. And I think we have about 18 session logs so far. But recently, an interesting session came up where there was a massive battle in one of the big cities, and I resolved it by abstracting everything, kind of like I did in the Sons of Lady 87 book, but I added some additional things where I would make dice pools based on the factions that were all involved, and one of the players is the leader of one of the sides in the conflict, and they're fighting against the 87 killers. So I'm just going to use some dice here as an example, and hopefully I won't turn off anything on my computer while I'm doing it. So for example, Lady 87, she had, I don't know, you can see this. I don't know where my camera is. There we go. So Lady 87 had 6d10, and at the start of the session, because of other things that were going on, he technically had a pool of 9, but he had 7. And so I just rolled them off against each other in each phase of the combat. But what also was happening was every once in a while players would say, hey, I'm going to go and seek out this character and fight them, or I'm going to go try to assassinate this person. If they did that phase of the combat, I would reduce the dice pool by 1d10 for each person doing that. Each player character doing that, I should say. If an NPC went with them, I wouldn't deduct it. But if a player character did it, I deducted it from the pool. Two players in the game that night were perfectly happy to do that. Honestly, I was a little bit surprised because I thought they had like a dice pool of 9, and lowering it to 7 versus the 6. I thought that was radically altering the odds. But they ended up making the right tactical decision, and they one of them infiltrated Guan Manor and assassinated one of the leaders, Guan Yuan. The other one was able to confront a woman named Whitebrow Demoness Fayan, and it was kind of cool because it sort of led to this combat where what I would do is for each round I would go to that player, and then I would go back to the mass combat and then go back to that player. And so it was kind of like a battle unfolding around them as they were having this dramatic duel, which I think you've seen in wuxia movies, but you also see in Star Wars and in all kinds of action and adventure films. So I thought that it worked really well. The players seemed pretty happy with it, and it's not the conclusion of the campaign. It's this campaign's going to be probably about 20 sessions, and there's probably going to be a coda, and then I'm going to go back to Strange Tales New England, which I'll talk about in a moment. But yeah, so it was sort of like the climax of the campaign, and then after that we're going to have some tying up of loose ends that'll happen. There might be another battle between one of the characters and another sect leader, but it's basically resolving everything. So probably 1 or 2 more sessions. I think 2 would be good because we get right at 20, and 20 seems nice and neat, but I'm not particularly concerned about that. And again, I apologize if you hear background noise. It's because, again, I'm in an apartment now. Before we were in an apartment, but we were the only ones in the building. And now there's other people living around us. And so you might occasionally hear background noises like that. I'm going to try to set this up so that it's more soundproofed. I just don't really know how to do that. So, my screen just went blank for a moment. So let me So the other thing that I've been doing is Strange Tales New England. I got a couple of things to show you here. I talked about these in another podcast, which I think went up on YouTube. I'm sort of working out the kinks in that. But I've been reading this book, which is A History of Vampires in New England. It's about the vampire panic, somewhat inaccurately named, to be honest, but it's giving me a lot of ideas for the Strange Tales New England that I'm working on. And this book, which I find even more interesting, actually. This is Marblehead Myths, Legends, and Lore. It's a very short book. It's written by a woman who is the director of the Marblehead Historical Society, and it's just exactly what it says. It's a bunch of legends, lore, and stories about Marblehead that are sort of more in the. Some of them are in the supernatural realm. Some of them are just sort of folk tales and things like that. But it's a lot of really interesting local folklore. A lot of the stuff that I've already been dealing with in the Strange Tales New England book, but interestingly, she covers a lot of it as well. Because even though this book is about Marblehead, it also covers things that happened in Lynn and happened in other communities. So it's interesting because I found her take in particular to be very meticulous. So when she covered something that I had covered, like Thomas Veal, who was a pirate in Lynn or in Saugus, depending on how you describe it, and was sort of there's a lot of different legends, but basically he dug a hole or dug a tunnel in Lynn. I think I had to look up my notes, but to bury treasure or to find treasure, and he had been cursed by a woman that he might have wronged, or there are all kinds of other stories, but basically an earthquake sealed him in there, and it became like his tomb. And so it's now called Dungeon Rock because it's like the dungeon that contains the body of the pirate Thomas Veal. And she talks about it, and she included a lot of details I had never noticed or I'd never heard of before, actually. And so it was, I was able to incorporate some of those in there. And so, yeah, so the Strange Tales New England, I think the way that I would describe this is it's a modern supernatural horror RPG. It's going to be flexible. So even though there is like a core concept that's very much sort of Jacob's Ladder in nature, it's very, sort of, you're sort of in an afterlife or something, and it's not really clear what's going on. I want to make it so that it's easy to adapt so that people can just nix that and just have it be straightforward modern New England, or they can have a number of other mysteries that are going on that, maybe you're in the Matrix, maybe, it's a vast government conspiracy, maybe it's aliens. I really want to lean into those aspects of the game because it very much gets into like paranoia and that kind of stuff. But it's all set in New England. It's all stuff that's local. It's all stuff that I grew up hearing about or I had an interest in when I was a student and studying history. And the game is based on the same system as Strange Tales of Song Ling. And by the way, if my voice sounds funny or I'm not enunciating correctly, I got a temporary crown this week, and that's why it doesn't seem to be affecting things. But every once in a while, I try to say a word and it doesn't quite come out right. So it's based on the Strange Tales of Song Ling, but instead of the 4 paths that are in there are other paths that are things like Exorcist and Spirit Medium and Combatant, which is kind of like the Wandering Sword, but a little bit more modern. And there's also a Charlatan and a Tech Expert. So it's a little bit of a more robust game. It's not quite as simple as Strange Tales of Song Ling. And we've been having a blast running it. I took a break from it for a little while. I do that a lot. Every once in a while I need to take 3, 4, sometimes even a 6 months break just so I can come back to something and see it with fresh eyes and review it. And I found this last break helpful because it allowed me to reconnect with Overgate, which I had been losing some familiarity with because I was working on Strange Tales New England. And when we started prepping Lady 87 for release, I got back into reading the book again and running the campaigns, and I just just kind of got busy with that, which is important when you and I apologize, I was looking out the window, I saw a light pass by. It's important when I forgot, I lost my train of thought too. But it's important when you have like a line like Overgate, you have to be familiar with it. You have to be able to continue to put out books for it, that kind of thing, and support it. So happy to do that. It was a lot of fun. I like getting back into it. But now I'm ready to get back into Strange Tales New England, and I'll probably work on that. And then when that's done, I'll come back and do some more Overgate stuff. I'm still thinking exactly about how I'm going to do things because I've been winding down a lot of the writing and a lot of the design work. I don't want to. I feel like we've put out a lot of stuff, and things that we put out in the future, the landscape is changing, and so I want to adjust what we're doing to fit the landscape. Not in terms of changing the kind of content that I'm making, but changing maybe the format or the length and that sort of thing. And also, doing things that are a little bit more economical on my end, just because the big production books, again, ours aren't super big production compared to other companies, but for what we do, we put a lot of effort and time and money into them. It's harder to get the return on that. So I'm thinking of maybe moving into shorter things that'll be just as good in terms of content, but it'll be like, instead of a whole book, I'll do like an adventure or do that, and it'll be more contained, more instantly useful at the table, that kind of thing. I'm still thinking about it, and I'm not 100% sure exactly what direction I want to go. I'm always threatening to go and these different directions because that's the way my brain works, and I'm always switching from project to project because again, that's the way my brain works. The way that I tend to operate is I'll design a game, I'll get like 70% of the way through it, then I'll go to another project, and then I'll come back to the one that I was 70% of the way through and finish it. That's how I like to work. I just don't like to when steam runs low, I don't want to sort of force myself to the end of a project, but also when I find that I need that stoppage at about the 70 or 80% mark so that I can sort of ruminate on it. I like to think about a lot of things. I've talked about this a lot in my design posts. And again, this is an example I use all the time, but when I did House of Paper Shadows, that was literally just me sitting down and thinking, I think for weeks. I can't exactly remember, but before I ever wrote anything down. And that helped me get through a lot of things that were creating sort of a thin background. I'm not saying House of Paper Shadows is the greatest module ever written or anything like that, but my original ideas when I first was going to sit down and do it weren't as good as what I was able to come up with weeks later, both because I had been thinking about it and I had talked to people and gotten some feedback on some ideas, and I got a better sense of how to make it work better. So that's why I like taking these breaks. You sometimes you need time between, because you're sort of doing this where you're reading material. Like the way that I do things when I'm working on a project is, and this is somewhat probably connected to my background as a history student, but I really immerse myself in whatever it is I'm doing. So with Strange Tales New England, I started reading all kinds of local books like the one that I was showing you there, but also anything that was relevant to what I was doing. So I was reading a lot of Dante, the Divine Comedy in particular, and that plays a very big role in the Strange Tales New England concept. So I was reading that. I was listening to lectures on it. I was and I'm no Dante expert by any stretch. I'm not particularly skilled at poetry, but I was interested in it from like a religious angle. I read a lot on exorcisms. I got a bunch of books by exorcists. I got I used to be a big fan of the movie The Exorcist and The Exorcist 3. So when I was young, I'd only read the first Exorcist book, and I had read another book by Blatty. And when I was doing this, I was like, well, I'm going to read The Exorcist. I'm going to read, I think it was, I forget the exact name. It's like the Ninth Configuration. I'm probably getting the number wrong, but there's a really interesting movie that we covered on the podcast about it. I read that because that's sort of connected thematically. It's sort of like an unspoken trilogy. And then I read Legion, and I watched all the Exorcist movies again, and I was seeking out that kind of media. I was reading a lot of New England folklore, even reading stuff like Cotton Mather, obviously reading H.P. Lovecraft again. That's fairly easy though. That's like, it doesn't take much to prod me to read Lovecraft. But I was reading it with a particular aim in mind. So I think that is different. And I was also, because I live in New England, I was going to a lot of places that were connected to the things that I was writing about or to stories I was reading in Lovecraft. So I would take my friends to go see, there's a place called the Danvers State Mental Hospital. It's now in a bunch of apartments, and you can see posts I did on it in the blog. But it's basically Arkham Asylum. And so I went and I visited that. I actually found out my dad had worked there. It wasn't called Danvers State Hospital anymore. It was something, he had worked in like a different area of it. I think as an orderly or as counselor, I don't know which. I know he did all kinds of work when he was younger, and I know he was a counselor at one point, but he might have been an orderly when he was there. And so I visited that. We visited all the sites in Danvers, where Danvers is Old Salem Village. So we were visiting all the different buildings, and there are like some old houses that are connected to the where the witch trials first started, that are now just like foundations basically, but they have like signs up and all that. It's like a parsonage and interesting things. And went to City of Salem, which is I think where the trials were held. And again I live right next to Salem my whole life, so we've gone there. And for those who have only visited or maybe don't live in the area, there's sort of a lot of tourism stuff that goes on there. So when you go and you look at the historical stuff, you're never quite sure, how much of it is real, how much of it is, for the, is kind of like exaggerated and all that. And so, an example of that people often give is the Salem Witch Museum. People sometimes take issue with how that one is presented. I know when I was a student at Salem State, I went to Salem State College, it's now Salem State University. We had a professor who was particularly irritated by the way Salem handled its history. Now, personally, I like the Salem witch trials. I think that sometimes you need that exciting history to bring people into the more boring nautical history that really makes up more of what Salem was about. But I understood the criticisms. I thought were all fairly, reasonable. And so and again, I know I'm meandering all over the place, but I took a lot of my friends to these kinds of places. I would go to these places. I went to High Rock Tower in Lynn, which is a really cool spot. I definitely recommend people look that up and look up the Electric Messiah. I have a blog entry. I'll just hopefully I can link that below in the description. There's really cool stuff that happened there. And so the way I work is I really immerse myself in all this. I even have a cousin who's like a paranormal investigator. He was a consultant or something on one of these shows. I don't know if it was Ghost Adventures, but it was a show like that. I don't think he was actually on camera, though he might have been, but I know he was involved. And so I wrote to him on Facebook, and he and I communicated, and we even talked about the possibility of going and doing like I don't know exactly what it is when they go on like a stakeout for, an investigation, but, he talked about the possibility of doing something like that. Unfortunately, he lives out of state, so it's unlikely that'll happen, but it still might. I was even thinking of driving to Dover to see the Dover Demon, or not see the Dover Demon, but to, there, or go to the Bridgewater Triangle. Which is also interesting because I have a player in my group who's from that area, and there's a lot of contention from people in that area when you talk about the Bridgewater Triangle, because a lot of people feel that it's a more recent made up thing. And so, and again, I'm not weighing in on that. I'm just saying one of the players in my group had some very strong opinions about that, and so it was interesting to get his perspective. And at one point I was going to try to get him to go with me to the Bridgewater Triangle. But yeah, so I like to immerse myself in this stuff. I like to research it. And something that sometimes happens, though, is when I get to that 70 or 80% mark, is you start to get sick of all this. You've just been so immersed in it, you're drenched, and you don't want to deal with it anymore. You need to go back to kung fu fighting, or you need to go back to, kicking down dungeon doors or whatever. So that's one of the reasons why I need that break sometimes when I get to the 70 or 80% mark of finishing a book. But I think the real main reason is what I said before, which is I just need the time to sort of reflect on it, make some changes, and then decide what direction I want to go. Because I tend to write these things in like a blaze of just, it's like I get inspired to do what I write, most of it. And then, in that frenetic writing process, there's some really interesting stuff, but there's also a lot of crap that I want to get rid of, or things that seemed like a good idea at the time but weren't, or things that just got changed due to revisions, and then I need to go back and kind of thread it all together. So Strange Tales New England's, I think, a very interesting game. It's a monster of the week. It's, again, designed a lot like Strange Tales of Song Ling, so it works off of that tested foundation, but it introduces a lot of new things. And I think it's, again, it's really good for Monster of the Week, smaller campaigns. You could do a bigger campaign with it, but I've been doing it as sort of like campaigns of 1 to 10 sessions usually. I've done 1 to 10 sessions where each adventure is a level, because there are 10 levels in the game, or I've spread it out over 30 sessions where there's like 30 locations or 33 locations in the game. And so there's sort of like a marker at each, like, I don't know, like every 4 or 5 or whatever it is levels. My math's way off there, but you know what I mean. Every certain number of levels or every number of locations, they would go up a level, and they just work their way through them. There's a reason why I was going through all 33 locations, all tied to the themes of the game. And so, anyways, I've been going on way too long here, which I always do. Again, Strange Tales in New England is coming out soon. If you're curious about that, check out Strange Tales of Song Ling. That's available. And definitely check out Sons of Lady 87 if you're a Wandering Heroes of Ogre Gate fan. We're always getting new people interested in Ogre Gate. I think it's a really good system. It does what it does well. It's not the sort of streamlined and simple game that Strange Tales is, so just be aware of that if you came in through Strange Tales. Ogre Gate is a much more robust, much more tactical system, but all the tactics revolve around your abilities, so it's not like you really need to worry about pieces on a board or anything like that, but it is a very detailed game in that sense, and character creation's deep and all that stuff, so just keep that in mind. It is what it is. And so I'll be back on, and hopefully my hair will be a lot more kempt. I did notice there's a barber around the corner, so maybe I'll pay them a visit. Or maybe I'll just continue looking like a mountain man until I finish with Strange Tales in New England. Or I guess to fit the theme, a ship captain. I'm by the sea now. There's actually an old historical home of one of the old sea captains here. All the houses in this area, not all of them, but a lot of them have plaques on them. And it'll say like built in 17 whatever, and it'll give the person's name, and it'll be called the so-and-so house. And that's pretty common in Salem and in Marblehead, and in you see it in Beverly too, and in places all in this area, the North Shore. So yes, the beard seems kind of fitting for the area. But yeah, so I'll be back on, and until then, I will talk to you later.